Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and today I'm joined by Shawn Merwin. How are you doing today?
I am doing just peachy. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. It's been a while. So Shawn is one of the guys that I usually spend, at least a couple hours standing around with, chatting around. I think it's usually around the AL stuff, right?
Yep.
There's usually a group of people hanging out and just chatting about gaming and the industry and whatever
Yep.
else.
Yeah, we had at PAX a couple of PAX Unplugged. We sat next to each other at the German restaurant
Yeah.
and talked. I remember that. That's how long I think it's been since we've talked face to face, but we've chatted since then virtually.
Yeah. That's what I miss the most is like hanging out with people at conventions.
Yeah,
And,
the social part of it. It's a social game, so we're social animals, and we want to socialize.
one, I want to congratulate you on working with the Grimhollow folks, Ghostfire Gaming. You started working with them this year.
Mhm.
Before that, you've always been doing a lot of stuff, but it was kind of like freelance stuff. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Since about 2000, I've been a freelancer. For the last 3 years, I've been a full time freelancer until I started January 4th as executive lead designer at Ghostfire Games or Ghostfire
Nice.
Gaming.
You got a fancy title and everything.
Ooh, I know. It's got 3 words in it. That's how
Yeah.
important I am.
Well, and so you're no longer a nomad in the RP industry. You have a home.
I do. I do. It's a wonderful home. It looks a lot like the home I had before, but with a lot more Ghostfire in it.
Yeah. Less stress of figuring out where your next paycheck's coming from.
Oh, yes, that is a big relief.
So, how's working on Grim Hollow been for you?
It's been great. It's been great so far. I knew I would be taking the job starting at about I don't know, October of 2019 of 20, what year are we in? Yeah. And but I was finishing up other projects, so I was sort of waiting to get through my freelance stuff so I could start January 4th. And I really hit the ground running there because they had just finished their uh
Wait a minute,
player's guide.
2020 or 2019?
2020,
I
yeah,
was going to say
2020.
2019. Man, they must have really wanted you.
No, 2020. So I dove in, helped out finishing with the player's guide, which they had just kickstarted. And then my first project that I was running would be the Monster Grimoire, which is kickstarting now and will be out of Kickstarter in about 22 hours.
So, I feel like at this point you've worked for most of the companies, right? Because you've been freelancing for so long.
Yeah. Wizards of the Coast was, the company I worked for the most, especially in the organized play areas, because I worked on at least four different, an administrator in at least four different organized play campaigns over the years, from third edition up to fifth edition. And yeah, I worked. I think Paizo is like the only company that I probably didn't work for. I worked for Cobalt Press. I worked for Pelgrane Press. Uh, some other smaller ones along the way. So yeah, I feel like I've done my time in the industry. I think 20 years
Yeah.
hard labor is enough that I could take a full-time job and feel pretty good about it.
They'd have put you in the gulag for less time.
Yes, that's true. And sometimes the labor I think was harder here than there.
So, did you think like you had said like you were kind of headhunted, and you weren't really looking.
Mhm.
Did you expect if you were to go full time in this industry for a company that it would be like a third party company?
Oh, never. We've been around the industry enough to know, back in the 90s, 80s, 90s, you couldn't even put out a book, a D&D book,
Yeah,
because of the copyright. So, even working freelance back then was a long shot. And then 3E came out with the open gaming license, and then things started to pick up. But yeah, it's always been a dream of mine to work full time for a role playing game company. For back when from I was a 10-year-old playing AD&D. Uh, and I've applied at Wizards a few times, but it just never worked out because
Yeah.
I'm on the wrong side of the United States for that. But so it never the thought in going full time freelancer. I thought this is where this is the highest I'm going to make it. So I may as well enjoy the ride. And it was hard work, but I was doing well, and I had the flexibility uh, of picking the projects I wanted, even though as a freelancer, you pretty much have to take everything that's offered to you or you don't make enough money to survive.
Yeah,
And
I mean, even when things are going good as a freelancer, I imagine like you're still taking stuff just because it's like certain industries like I've worked in have definitely been feast or famine, so you don't want to ever say no to anything.
right, right. And I mean, I could turn down, the 2 cents a word
Yeah,
job, but I was doing things for 5 cents a word and things that I wasn't necessarily in love with, but you put in your time, due diligence, do the research, make the best product you can. And then the folks at Ghostfire Gaming contacted me and said, we're expanding and we would like you to come on board. And it was the last thing on my mind. And my first thought was, I'm doing okay. I've got flexibility. I don't need a full-time job. And then I listened to their pitch,
yeah,
and I thought, these folks have it together, and this is a great opportunity, not only to have a steady paycheck and to have benefits, but also to really make some things that I would not be able to make if I was freelancing. Right,
yeah,
I'm not going to be able to run a big Kickstarter on my own, as much as
yeah.
I wish I could. And so they showed me their plans, and I'm like, okay, sign me up.
Are you a fan of that genre? Because right now they're doing a lot of kind of like dark, gritty horror type stuff.
Yeah, I'm a fan of almost every kind of role playing game, and type
Yeah,
and game, and so there's things that I love about all of it. And when I read what they had already published in their campaign guide and their player's guide, I loved what they did. Which was, let's put the horror into the players as well as the setting, and let's mechanize the way that this horror is going to play, and let's make the world really dangerous, not dangerous in terms of there's monsters everywhere, but just dangerous in terms of having to survive. uh there's powerful curses, there's diseases, there's all of this stuff that makes just survival hard, and not in sort of a post-apocalyptic way, but just in sort of a, everyone is dealing with this as a normal way of life. And so that's really what drew me in terms of their content, and to know that I would be able to make monsters that fit into that milieu, into that gameplay style, uh, sold me on wanting that to be my first project.
yeah. Like I don't know for like um folks at Ghostfire and Decamany. They really kind of like started changing my mind on what I thought was kind of possible with like campaign settings. Like I'm like, when people have asked me about like the different ideas they've had for Kickstarters and stuff, I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I don't think campaign settings are really a way to go. I don't know if there's enough interest there. But like, there's been a few of them that really have been able to do it, and the Grim Hollow series has really kind of hit it out of the park. I mean, over $2 million essentially on Kickstarter between all the different projects they've done.
Mhm.
Shows that there's definitely interest. I don't know if it's because of the specifics of this particular campaign setting. Also, Humblewood, over $1 million as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's just like these are like these niches that can kind of make it, or if it's just like all about the marketing and finding the right base.
I think it's all of the above. I
Yeah,
think the audience is growing to the point where, maybe a few years ago, even a couple years ago, maybe we wouldn't have been able to do what we're doing. But when the market base grows, all the little niche audiences grow. And so you can specialize and you can do those things and make it worth the time and the effort and the money that you put into it, to get that back. And as long as you do good work and the people appreciate the product that they're receiving at the end of it, then you're safe to move on and do the next.
Let me grab a question from the chat. And folks, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. Just put question in front of it so they're easier to pick out. DM Guru 2, what is the best perk of working as an independent publisher versus working for such a huge name like Wizards?
Uh, my relationship with Wizards was a little different than a lot of freelancers, in the sense that I was helping, and in some cases overseeing with their organized play campaigns. So that gave me more freedom than a typical freelancer who might be working on like a hardcover book where they just get an outline
Yeah.
and you're right to that outline. So I got to work on the Oracle of War campaign uh, with Will Doyle, and so we really got to build that from the ground up. And Wizards didn't have a heavy hand in saying it needs to be this, it needs to be that. They were really like, give us your best ideas and let's go from there. And the ideas that we gave them, they loved. So I got to do my own thing, and Will got to do his own thing in that way. But a normal freelancer relationship with a company like Wizards, it is sort of constricted, and you are limited in what you can do. You can work, you can do really creative things within the box that they give you, but the box is there. Whereas if you are your own independent publisher, you can do any wild imaginative things and see where it goes. And maybe maybe you crash and burn, and maybe it turns out to be the next big thing. You just never know, but at least it's your it's your airplane that you're flying, and you can go to great heights, or have that crash landing in the cornfield.
Yeah. Also, like smaller companies, you tend to just have more input or more direct access to to the people that make the decisions anyway,
Mhm.
right? So in that regards, is like a little bit more of an intimate setting, where a much larger company, you're just just a bunch of cogs.
Mhm.
So you might not even get to talk to someone that actually makes the decisions, or
Yeah.
where your ideas are going to get to, or your ideas might just get stolen. So
Yeah, yeah. Wizards is a large company. There's no doubt about it. There's, hundreds of people at it, and who knows how certain decisions are made. Certainly, you as a freelancer don't know. You just deal with the editor or the producer or whoever
yeah,
is your contact, and I've loved everything that I've done for Wizards of the Coast. There's no doubt. It's been great fun working with a ton of different editors, producers over the years. Great people, great game minds. But I'm also really enjoying sort of leading a project now in this way, and we'll see we'll see what comes of it.
yeah. So Dave Rosser has a question. I don't know how much input you'll have on this, but I have some thoughts. What kind of future things open up after $1 million Kickstarter? Have plans for future changes because of it? Also, I don't know how much you can talk about either as well.
Well, I can safely say that I have very little dealing at this point with the business side of things,
Yeah,
uh, and it needs to be pointed out that this Monster Grimoire Kickstarter, which is over $1 million, so it's amazing, but it doesn't just include books. There's maps, there's minis, there's tokens, there's cards, there's a bunch of things. So, those things need to be produced and transported and all of that. So it may sound like, oh, $1.2 million Kickstarter. If that was just, one book, that
yeah.
would be incredible. It's a lot more than that. So I'm not buying my own private island anytime soon. Let's put it that way. I will happily take my weekly paycheck and get to make monsters and work with cool people.
Yeah, like having run a fairly decent Kickstarter, and having to pay for things, and we did include some things that were not just books, right? Like that stuff ends up eating into that
Mm.
Kickstarter really fast, and it also will end up eating into it for a lot more than you expected, from my experience. uh,
Right.
but one of the things that I kind of saw was a panel by Monte Cook Games, and or maybe just Shanna was on it, Shanna Germain, and
Mhm.
she spoke to the way Monte Cook Games conducts their businesses. Like they do Kickstarters to fund the company more so to fund the project. And I think that's where a lot of the companies, like smaller companies, end up going.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, especially once you get a little bit ahead, like I'm sure after maybe the second Kickstarter for Ghostfire, and this is pure speculation on my end, is that allowed them to then work forward into the next project, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, all of the people backing the monster book are probably really funding the next project or several projects, and it allows a company to kind of operate, smaller companies that would not have been able to do that in the past.
Yeah. I mean, the executive team like Jordan and Matt at Ghostfire, they're just really, really smart people, really good at what
Uh,
they do. And so, I trust them to do the math part of things, to handle that because, if I had run this Kickstarter, it would have made $1.2.
yeah,
They're running this Kickstarter and it's made $1.2 million. And
yeah.
that's the difference. And if I had continued freelancer, 2021 was going to be here's when I run my Kickstarter, and I am glad that I am not in that situation.
What kept you from taking the plunge?
Just total fear. I'm a coward. Uh, yeah, it is though. It's like I fear failure. I fear losing a ton of money. I fear letting people down. I fear all of those things, and I'm not an expert in Kickstarter, in finances, in production, in transportation, in all of those areas. And if you have the chance to work with people who know all about that and are good at that and have that all figured out, uh, I that's the route I'm going to take, right? I'm going to realize what my weaknesses are, and I'm going to seek those who can fill in for my weaknesses.
Yeah, it's tough because like when we did our Kickstarter, like before we did anything, I think we already spent like 5 to 7 grand, right? And
Yep.
it very much feels like putting it all on black.
Yeah.
When you do that kind of stuff. So, are you now going to try and do your Kickstarter idea through Ghostfire?
Yeah, I've had, a few ideas over the years, and it's you can't do all of them for various reasons. Sometimes
Uh,
the timing's not right, sometimes the market's not right. So but like I said, I've got a great team now to work with, and we can talk about the different ideas that we all have, not just me, but the whole company, and figure out what's the best one at this time, and what cool things can we supplement it with.
yeah. I think it was Dave just asked me or asked where Grim Hollow came from. We were a sponsor for their first Kickstarter. I believe they did some sponsorship with us, and I believe it was kind of like a primer, basic campaign setting book was the initial one, and then after that they went into the
Okay.
player's book, and now they have the monster book. So I don't know if they're going to keep going with Grim Hollow or move on to the next thing.
Oh,
Uh,
time will tell.
Time will tell.
No, the idea for the campaign, I think, starts right with Jordan, who's the CEO of our company, and
Yeah,
Matt and their home group. This was their world. This was their setting. These were the house rules that they put in to make this sort of grim, horrific, dark fairy tale, dark fantasy setting, and they let's publish it, and they did. And I've read lots of third party books in my day, some really great, some not so good. And I was really impressed with their campaign guide. And then when I saw the rules for the player's guide, I was like, okay, this is some serious stuff. They know what they're doing. They're fun role players. They're good creative minds mechanically and flavor wise, setting wise. And this is worth digging into a little deeper. So
yeah.
that's what got me.
I think the first Kickstarter was just a couple of years ago, probably
Hmm.
about 2 years ago. So,
Yeah.
um, so they're still kind of they're in their infancy for as far as companies go, but they're kicking ass right out the gate.
Mhm.
So Brian wants to know: would you share some of your favorite, most gnarly monster designs from Grim Hollow?
I can name a couple, and yeah, I always get the question, "What's your favorite?" And the
Yeah.
favorite is like the last one you worked on, because it's like, oh, that's the cool idea. Uh, the my favorite are the ones that work well in the Grim Hollow setting. The world is called Etheris, um, and so that they work in Etheris, but they can also be pulled out and put into any campaign. So the last one I was developing that was super cool was called Lithobel of Tormach. So Tormach is an archdemon, which is sort of the highest evil power in this setting, and he's the archdemon of slaughter, of war and slaughter. So people that follow him tend to fight each other to the death just for fun, because they want to be exalted. And in the case where there's this duel to the death and both combatants die because of their wounds at the same time, the Tormach approves of this. So he memorializes them by combining them together into one creature and turning them into this stone being called a Lithobel. And then they just go and slaughter everything in sight to show Tormach's glory. And
I,
so there
as you
it's
do.
this, yeah, so it's this statue like thing with two heads and four arms that's just going around, and it's got the same weapons that they were using when they were fighting and and destroy things. So it's things like that. And now you can take that story. It's this is a story specific for Tormach, but you can take that and move it into any setting you want. Take any god or deity or higher being, demon lord
Or
of.
just an instance of two opponents dying at the same time.
Exactly. And so it's that flavor that fits this specific thing, but it also works anywhere else. And then you have a cool monster on top of it. Uh, so that was the last one that I worked on. I have sort of
You
have
know,
a
let's
running
back up a
list.
little bit for anyone that's not just familiar with the Grim Hollow setting.
Mhm.
If you would go into that a little bit for folks.
Right. So Grim Hollow is the name of the overall setting. As I said, the world is named Etheris, and it is a dark fantasy horror tinged campaign that really leans into the trope that the world is a dangerous place. The world is a dark place, and there are different areas of the world that sort of each have their own flavor of darkness and horror. So magic is obviously an important part of the setting, but it's also not trusted by the common folk. And one of the nations uses this to sort of keep control of everything, especially magic, by having an inquisition. So if you are live in this area or travel through this area and you are a magic user, you better watch out, because if they see you using magic, you're in trouble. But they have ways of finding out if you have the innate or the practiced ability to use magic. So, there's that sort of thing. There is a realm that's run by vampires. So there's that sort of gothic intrigue, setting. There's an area in the north that is sort of steeped in Viking heritage, where there not only is it cold and inhospitable, but there's different clans that are they're trying to do different things that you have to sort of be careful of who you back and what they're doing. So there's all of this going on in this setting. So there's different flavors of darkness, different flavors of horror. But what I love about it is that you can't just throw these heroes at every problem and they just defeat it by beating things up. So there's monsters where you need to find out what their weakness is, because if you don't know their weakness, you're not going to be able to kill them. Now, maybe their weakness is they need a special kind of acid to get through their skin. Well, how do you get that acid? There's no big city that has this acid maker. Well, there's this other kind of monster that if you harvest its gland, it makes acid. this special kind of acid you need to defeat this monster. So we have this whole set of salvage rules. So you're not going to the magic mart and just buying magic weapons and potions and everything, but every monster you kill or every like NPC enemy you defeat may have something that you need. So you can either take it or you can use your skills, your tool proficiencies, and some time and some money to make the thing that you need. So it's sort of this Monster Hunter and Monster Hunter vibe where you are in charge of making the things that you need to defeat the bad guy or the monster.
And also too, like I know the first campaign setting, like a big thing was introducing rules for playing like lycanthropes and vampires and
Yep.
maybe some other things as well.
Yep. There is, yeah. There are transformations.
Yeah.
So players can take on these transformations that set on top of their class and their race, and it gives them extra power, but it also has flaws, and the flaws can be pretty significant. Like if you reach 0 hit points, instead of being unconscious, you die because you've sold your soul to the Fey Queen, and she wants your soul now. So guess what? You died. No resurrection for you. You better go deal with the Fey Queen. So there's significant flaws that are tied to these transformations. So that brings in this darkness. It's how dark, how far into the darkness are you willing to go to fight the darkness that you're fighting? And will you become the monster that you are trying to fight in the first place? So there's that sort of dynamic in play with these rules.
Yeah. So for me, like this isn't really my jam for like long term. Like stints of this kind of game would appeal to me, but like I wouldn't want to do like a long protracted campaign. I'm just not into like the dark and gritty like I was. And like when I saw Grim Hollow, it kind of made me think of like a bunch of 90s goth kids got together and made a campaign setting for D&D. But maybe they should have been Vampire the Masquerade players instead. And this is kind of what you get, but done at a really high level and done really well. And there's definitely like, even when, when they first came on the scene, there's definitely a lot of really cool things in it. It's the kind of like, these are the kind of books that I would get to cherry pick through and pull out the things that I would want to use in my games.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just a way to model this certain type of campaign, but do so in a way that's supported by the rules rather than, just sort of make it up as you go along.
And also horror just in general is really hard, but in D&D it's even harder.
Yeah.
So does Grim Hollow kind of address that?
It does. Both the campaign guide and the player's guide give DMs, a ton of tips on how to best, do horror, things to look out for, things to avoid, but things that you can lean into a little harder. And it's funny to see, Grim Hollow, the first book came out, like you said, a couple years ago, and now we're getting a lot of Ravenloft content, and I'm seeing, it's not exactly the same thing, but the same sorts of advice that the Grim Hollow campaign books have given out, we're seeing in the Ravenloft setting. So it's knowing what might trigger your players and avoiding that, or ways to get around that, and all of those things are addressed in the campaign book and the player's guide pretty well. And we'll also do it in the monster book. We'll give some advice on, if your players are deathly afraid of spiders, there's several spider monsters. Here's what you can do to get, play around that.
Yeah, maybe they shouldn't be spider monsters. Maybe you can do something else with them.
Scorpion monsters.
Yeah, I think it's a great area to come up with ideas in your game. Like in one of the games I'm running right now, that was kind of inspired because, like in our session 0, one of the players they brought up something I didn't expect. They're like, I really would like to not see any violence against cows because of my religion. So I was like, okay, we can. I didn't see that happening anyway, but
right.
That's fine. We can definitely do something with that. And then I was like, does that apply to minotaurs? And then
Yeah,
like, well, what can I do instead of a minotaur? Which kind of like led to some like plot developments and different areas to go into in that
right.
story.
Yeah. What's a godatar? We need a godatar.
A Kotatar, yeah. I actually went with a so also in that world is my Court of Worms games. So it's like all the PC races are like all reptilian, like
Mm,
dragonborn, kobold, lizard folk, and it's
nice.
ruled by these dragon emperors that are more like celestial beings than regular dragons. So I introduced this person that kind of got cursed, and I kind of like mashed a lycanthrope with a rhinoceros iguana and
Nice.
and kind of like some minotaur like attributes. So I was like, what can I do
Yeah.
that's like completely different?
Yeah. The horned lizard. There you go.
There's always other things we can do. It's just I like this stuff as like I see them as challenges and opportunities to be more creative.
Well, and that's it, right? I mean, you are creating a world with your players, and even if you're picking up the Grim Hollow book and using it wholesale, you are still creating a different world than the next table over,
Yeah.
because of your player choices, because of your choices as a DM, and so you can do any of those things. It's free to change things in books using your imagination and making all your players happy. And if your players don't want these dark transformations, you can totally avoid them. There's also a system of sort of more complex backgrounds, advanced backgrounds. So rather than the background being something that you did but you no longer do,
Mhm.
you can now sort of advance in your background as well. So you become, you were a pit fighter. You're still a pit fighter. You're just gaining more uh, renown as a pit fighter as you adventure, and if you perform certain tasks while you adventure. Uh, so it sort of gives a little bit of play with that as well. So you could, just avoid dark transformations and use the advanced backgrounds from the book.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like I see like every campaign setting as being like a multiverse
Mm,
version of whatever the actual official one is, because once you take it and bring it put it forth at your table, it's going to inevitably become something different and change and evolve it in different ways anyway.
yep, for sure.
So Dave wants to know: Is this the first project with minis you've been involved with? Did you have any work on that? And what do you think about the process and seeing your creations made real?
You never, or at least I never, get over seeing something that I've done put into art,
Yeah,
because I am such a horrible artist, and my spatial relationship brain is terrible. I can't draw. Art doesn't. I can't like critique it because I'm just terrible with it. So seeing someone, like some of the first art I ever saw from something I wrote was for third edition. There was Assault on Nightworm Fortress, was one of the adventure path adventures from Wizards, and the art order I wrote for the Nightworm ended up being the cover. And so I was like, wow, I described that and now
yeah.
it's there. And it was so cool to do that. And it's the same thing for minis. It's the same thing for anything. If you're a person who works with words and you see someone's beautiful art, and our art director, I have to mention Suzanne Helmy, who is a artist, great artist on her own. She's done work for Wizards of the Coast and other companies. She's our art director for this book, and she's working with some amazing artists. And you know, I've been sharing some of the art that our designers have worked. Designers write the monster. I pass it along. So Suzanne gets it, passes it on to an artist, and to share back some of the art that's coming out of it. We have a monster called the Toy Maker, who, if you're bad, comes and gets you, and then makes toys from your parts.
Oh, it's
And
gruesome.
yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, it's a horror thing, and so there's an incredible picture of the Toy Maker making toys. Uh, I think that's been up on social media. If you follow Ghostfire Gaming on Facebook or Twitter, you may have seen that, and it's it's just creepy and beautiful and astounding. Um, the way that art was done.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of putting a book together, is going back to the designer and just sharing an image with them and not saying anything,
Right.
right? And then like, then them like kind of being able to say, oh, that's this or that.
I'm just
That's a
going to
lot of
leave
fun.
this here and put it in
Yeah.
the, the Slack that we use and have, wow. Yeah.
So I remember being at, I think it was Gen Con. I usually stop in and see a lot of different artists that I've met, and Chris Seaman, uh, he's done a lot of Wizards of the Coast art and Magic the Gathering, but he drew the Goblin Hawker, the ogre that has like the catapult that launches
Oh yeah.
goblins and spiked armor,
Yeah.
and and like he had just gotten one of the miniatures for that, and he's like showing it to me. You can see how excited he is, and like to see something that he drew, made into this to a mini. So
Yeah.
like, so it's super cool, and also to see someone who like illustrates things really awesome
Mhm.
get that excited over someone taking their illustration.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's interesting to develop monsters either from scratch or from a piece of art, because we had
yeah,
several pieces of art to start with. It's like, okay, here's the monster. Based on what you're seeing, create the stat block for it and the lore for it. And that's always a fun exercise too. You coming at it from a little different angle, but it changes up the way that you think about the monster you're creating, how to make it work with the lore, with the image, and still make it fun for DMs to actually use at the table mechanically.
so what is your favorite kind of stuff to work on as a designer?
Oh, it's hard to say. Yeah, we were talking before about, am I sick of monsters yet?
Yeah.
And I'm not. I've been working on it for a couple months, and I will be working on it for a couple more months, and I'm not sick of it. But I also, a part of the Kickstarter that we unlocked is layers, so kind of short adventures that the monsters will be in their layers, and the adventurers have to confront them. So those, so I'm looking forward to doing some of those layers as well, just to get back into that adventure writing sort of thing. Before that, I was doing development on rules for the player's guide, and that was fun. There's things about every part of D&D game design that I love, and I don't want to give any of it up. And I don't want to say
Yeah.
this is what I love the most, because then, the someone or my part of my brain will say, "Oh yeah, you think you only like writing adventures? Well, I'm going to shut down now when you try to make monsters," and I don't want that to happen, because my brain and I fight quite a bit.
Yeah. Who's winning?
Yeah, it's not me.
Well, and also it's kind of nice, like the change of pace. Like if you're doing a lot of one thing for a bit, to go to do something else.
Mhm.
Um, and I think creatively, it also can be helpful as well to keep you from getting into a rut if all you do is monsters or
Right.
adventures or player stuff.
Yeah.
Shifting back and forth changes it up.
Yeah, and it's also important to talk to other designers about things other than game design, right? So it's important to, take take time every couple of weeks, and it's like, hey, how's this project going, and just talk about the industry for a while, and let your
Yeah.
mind percolate on whatever issue you're dealing with at the time. And a lot of times, just talking with someone else, you'll either get the idea straightened out without even trying, or they'll say something that, I'm having this trouble with this monster, and they'll be like, "Oh, what about these 7 ideas?" I'm like, "Okay, yes, those are all good ideas." And so here we go.
Do you feel like, working full time for a company now, that it's allowed you to structure your time better, as opposed to being a freelancer?
Yes, um, but only because I'm doing both, like design stuff, but also like project management things. So I have to
Mhm.
deal with contracts and deal with, internal questions, and marketing needs you to take an hour and look over this copy, or, so how I work it almost literally is take an hour, set an alarm after the hour, stop what you're doing, finish whatever line you're on and then move over and okay, it's time to do the emails. Oh, our alarm goes off. Okay, let's look at the marketing questions. Oh, okay, let's go over here. And that at least for me, I know some people cannot work like that. For me, it helps because I don't get stuck in a rut. I don't get, start drifting if my brain isn't quite in the place where monster design is the thing. Uh, so okay, maybe I'll go edit something rather than design something. Just keep changing, keep moving, keep that brain firing.
Oh god, that's such a mood. Like I'll go to go someplace to grab something I need it, and the next thing you do, I've done three or four things over there instead of getting the thing I needed and getting back to what I was doing.
Yeah, yeah. I My phone has alarms for like every hour.
Yeah. Well, so I was thinking more along the lines of maybe work home balance.
Oh, I've never had good work home balance. I even when since 1995
Yeah.
I have been working from home. I've worked as for a software company as a technical writer, as a QA person, as a project manager, all from home. I've taught at different colleges, always from home. Even not even pandemic wise. So I'm always at work and I'm always home,
Yeah. Yeah. That
and
sounds
it's terrible.
awesome and terrible all at the same
Yeah,
time.
and fortunately my wife is a high school teacher, but she's always grading. She teaches AP US history, so
Mhm.
she's always grading papers, she's always planning the next lesson. So we've got it scheduled. So okay, hey, let's make dinner, eat dinner, let's talk, take a walk. Okay, back to work for an hour. Oh, let's take a break, let's watch a show. Okay,
Yeah.
back to work for an hour. So we've sort of got this rhythm down that lets us get our work done and still have fun and be together.
I was thinking, and maybe a little hopeful for you that, with not having to put all that extra work into finding work, right, and making sure you have work, another job. Then again, you've been around long enough. I don't know if that is even an issue for you anymore,
Yeah.
but that might have freed up some time for you to live.
I'm always writing. I am, even when I'm
Yeah.
walking on the beach. I will be walking along. My wife will say, "You're writing, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm writing."
Yeah.
It's just how the brain works. There's nothing we can do about it. So,
Well, I could do that, but unless I'm physically writing it someplace, it's not going to stay. So,
well, it doesn't always stay, but yeah,
unfortunately, my head's more like an etch a sketch than a word processor.
yeah. Well, you're making do with that Etch a sketch pretty
Yeah.
well. So, good job.
So we were talking a little bit before we went live about you also do some teaching, and you just mentioned it as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. This semester I live in a town called Fredonia, New York, and there's a local state college, and they'd asked me a couple years ago, actually, if I would be willing to teach a writing for role-playing games class as part of a new major that they're putting together, a creative writing major. They wanted sort of experiential writing, so technical writing, writing that people actually do for a job,
yeah,
and they knew that I had done this, and so I said sure. And then it took them a semester to get it approved, but then there was a semester where they couldn't do it, and then there was the pandemic, and so this last semester was the first semester I was able to teach it, and so I had 20 students, and it was really fun. It was interesting to try to teach this. Uh, and with different experience levels from the students. I didn't know if they were going to come in like being experts in D&D or if they would be completely new. And it turned
yeah,
out there was a pretty widespread, a pretty strong dichotomy of some students that were like, I play D&D twice a day every day, right? And I've written my own rules. And then there was the people were like, I'm taking this because I needed a English credit and I didn't want to take Victorian poetry. So here
yeah.
I am. I don't know anything about role playing games, but it was great fun. And teaching always teaches you, Right. So, I'm like, okay, what am I going to teach? I'm going to teach interactive fiction to start with. So here we go. Interactive fiction. These are the things. How is it like writing for a role playing game? Well, writing box text is sort of like setting the scene in interactive fiction. And then you have to, if you're writing an adventure, make a matrix. Well, you have to make a matrix if you write interactive fiction. And so, you go through this process of thinking about what you do, and you learn what you do and learn maybe how you can do what you do better. And I also had people come on into the class to talk. So I had Alana Abbott, who writes interactive fiction for it's a app that you can it's an interactive fiction app. What is it called? Oh, I forgot. But she writes interactive novels for them. And I had Phil Vecchione, and I had some folks from Wizards, and I had James Introcaso come, and each talked about a different thing in game design, world building, and monster design, and all of those things. And I just sat back for maybe every third class and just listened to these experts in their field talk about how they did things. So I'm like taking notes. Oh yeah, it's a good idea for my next book. And the students got to write D&D stuff or write role-playing game stuff for a class. So they were super enthused for the most part.
Is that something you're going to continue doing?
Probably. When I said yes, it was before I started working full time.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm committed to this. That's fine. And what I would really love to do is turn it into a class where they're actually, writing things that I'm working on at the time. Right. So turn it into a workshop class where, hey, now I'm writing, this book about this thing in my job. Let's sit and let's design monsters. Let's sit and workshop making subclasses. Let's workshop world building. Let's workshop this. But we might have to divide it into two classes, sort of a beginners and then an advanced to make everyone comfortable doing that. But there was definitely a good part of the class who would have just loved to sit down and turn it into some sort of like a working company within the class.
So Sly Flourish has a question for you. Actually, we kind of talked about this
the first
half. The first half, anyway. What sort of RPG material do you enjoy writing the most? And you kind of said you just like it all. But the second part of the question is, which do you find most challenging?
I think it's hard to not say the really most fiddly rules. So class design is probably the toughest, because that's what gets the most use. That's what has the most tendency to break. As I told my class, a role-playing game is a machine, right? You feed input into this machine, and dice roll, the machine whirls, and out the other end comes a story or results. And making an adventure is fun, and it can be challenging, but DMs can add their own spin to it. They're usually pretty good about that. But when you start working with the things that the players are delving into, those bits of the machine, if they don't work together well, that's when trouble starts. So the things that take the most play testing are generally the things that take the most that are the hardest to work on.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, a lot of the stuff on the DM side, if you F it up, it's there for a scene, right? Or an adventure.
Yeah.
And you can it's easier to tweak and adjust as you go. But when you put out a subclass and someone's playing it, and then you're like, you find things that aren't working, or they're broken, or they're too much, like no player is going to ever be happy if you start having to take things away.
Yeah.
In the middle of your game.
Yep. I was going to tell Mike that, anybody can write about dungeon mastering. That's easy. No. Just kidding, Mike.
Anybody can be lazy DMing. No, actually, like we've talked quite a bit about Sly on our channel with different things, because really, like, we found someone who was kind of espousing the philosophy that we've kind of had, all along. Where it's like, and it's always like, his is far more data driven and scientific than us just being annoyed with our players not
Right.
doing the things we wrote for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
there's a ton of great information out there about how to do everything in role playing games, and someone can say the exact same thing in a different way, and it might resonate. Right? Someone who reads Mike's books and might be like, "I don't get it," might read a different tone or a different presentation from someone else and say, "Oh yeah, I see what they're saying." Uh, Making rules, that's mathematically driven. There's no sort of way to get around that or to say it differently. If you're saying you get a plus blank, or you get to have advantage every time blank happens and you're rolling with advantage every time, that's a problem.
Do you find it's hard to create for 5e in the sense that you're like I sometimes I'll see this thing where people are creating things for 5e and I'm like, you really just need to go back to playing third edition.
Yeah, it's yeah, as somebody who it's funny, as someone who has edited stuff in third edition, fourth edition, and fifth edition coming in from freelancers, you can totally tell if someone was playing a previous edition and
Yeah.
then just created something for this new edition without actually playing the new edition and seeing how things work. So yeah, uh, you it's different. You can get away with certain things, like like with adventures, you can write it in a way that it's going to work. Third edition goblins, fourth edition goblins, or fifth edition goblins, it's all going to work. But if you get into certain, yeah, the way certain mechanics work,
The player stuff.
yeah, you can totally see that, like, they pulled this feat or this power out of fourth edition, and they're trying to make it work in fifth edition the same way it worked in fourth edition, and it's just not.
It's
It's
just
not
not quite the
translating.
same.
It's not translating well. Yeah.
From your role playing class, did you get any converts?
Uh, it's hard to tell. It was strange because we couldn't meet in person,
Yeah.
and the students. I mean, most of the students, they were had their cameras on, they were engaged, but there were a few who cameras were always off, didn't really contribute to class. And it was interesting in the sense that all of the students there were no like non-traditional older students.
Mhm.
All of them were the 18 to 22 sort of range, and I felt like the class was a pretty good dichotomy of sort of the RPG world, right? There were percentage of them that were DMs and totally into things and made their own stuff. There were a few that had never played but watched Critical Role or watched Acquisitions Incorporated or watched some of the other streams, and that's how they interacted with the game. And so they just wanted to do a little writing,
Yeah.
as part of it. And then there were some that were like, I like video games, but I don't know what a role playing game is. So with them, I went all the way back to let's do a one-page role-playing game. Take one simple one and show you have mechanics, you have an input, you have a randomizer, you have an output. That's a role-playing game. You can put all sorts of cool stuff on top of it, funny voices, complex stories, but for the most part, a role-playing game, the game part is this. So, and some of them are like, oh yeah, and even some of the more advanced students who play D&D all the time were like, when I showed them Fate Accelerated, I showed them,
Yeah.
and they're like, blew their minds,
Yeah.
just like it blew my mind when I first played a different game other than D&D. It's like, wow,
I don't
there's
need a
other,
stack of books.
yeah, there's other ways of doing things. I'm like, yes, there are other ways of doing things. There are simpler games, there are more complex games, but let's look at the similarities between all of these different games and what we as designers do when we create within them.
Were you getting homework back and you're just like, oh, they're definitely just working on their campaigns here?
Oh, for sure. And that was actually fun. I had some
Yeah.
people that were like, I was like, create a monster. And they're like, can we give you a monster we've already made? I'm like, totally. Let me
Yeah.
see it. And there was great stuff. There was stuff that was super imaginative, but mechanically it was terrible. There was
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff that was great mechanically, but no imagine. It was the range, just like you would get from a freelancer.
It was D&D Wiki
Yeah,
live.
pretty much. That's okay. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
some monsters I've turned in for projects that I've done over the years where people were like, "What the heck is this?"
What is this?
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Comes with the
it's
territory.
exactly, exactly. But it was fun just to interact with a new group of people who are, for the most part, excited about D&D again, and talking with them about what I do and what the industry does and how you can actually make money in this industry now. Surprisingly,
What are you playing nowadays?
I am playing in a Icewind Dale Ram of the Frostmaiden campaign, and as a player, I ran an Acquisitions Incorporated game before that, all online. Um, I've been playing a little bit of Elder Sign, the dice rolling Cthulhu game. I've played that recently, and doing things like escape room, murder mystery in a box sort of things because we can't leave.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I've been delving into those a bit. Uh, and just to see how are they designed. Can any of those ideas be incorporated into an adventure or a role-playing game, uh, and have everybody like it, even if they're not into escape rooms or puzzles and things like that.
So, how often are you gaming nowadays?
uh it was 2 days a week, but for 2 hours at a time, using roll 20.
Yeah.
And we're to the point where it's like we're all inoculated, we can get back together safely now. What are we going to do? We're like, we want to get back together, can we do it? Because I play with people in Buffalo and I have to drive an hour to get there, and it never seemed like a big deal before. I
Yeah.
just like zoop up, zip back. Now it's like an hour, wow, hour there, hour
Commuting an
back.
hour to anything is not exactly
Yeah,
zipping, especially if you do it on a regular basis.
yeah. So
That used to be my
so
work commute, an hour each way.
yeah, but it's also weird because we also need to play test things depending on what I'm working on. So we'll interrupt sometimes our campaign and go, okay, make third level characters. We're going to test this adventure, or make
Yeah.
third level characters. I've got this stack of monsters. We're going to run some combats with them. Just to break things up. And the guys I play with are pretty flexible in terms of that. As long as there's beer involved, they're
They
generally
don't care.
they're generally happy to do whatever.
Nice. Bribes work.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm in. I got like 13 games going on a month.
Yeah,
But like they're different. Like some of them are just like monthly games. Some of them are, I've got a couple weekly games that we play.
yeah,
And also like our games tend to be shorter nowadays because they
yeah,
are online.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
like
it works well, that sort of shorter game. And as someone who wrote several adventures that you can play in an hour, I do enjoy and appreciate the shorter game. But sometimes you just need to sit down for 4 or 5 hours and
yeah, that's
and
how like our
roll a
in
lot of
person
dice.
games.
Yep.
Yeah, it used to be, and I guess next month we'll start back with them. Which that'll be weird having to see people
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, but it's funny because as a designer, it's really important to do. Because if you start spending 24/7 just designing and designing and designing, you're going to you're going to lose your edge a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I even without that aspect, just the human interaction part of it, right? Like that's kind of the great thing about RPGs is like
Yeah.
so much of our lives has moved kind of online and
Mhm.
digitized, right? Actually having this activity that we do together with a
Yeah.
group is is super helpful, right? Because it's conducive to that. Right? We still
Yeah.
need that.
We are social beings. We role play
So I think
gamers.
I'll grab one last question here from
All
Brian.
right.
What surprised you most from your game writing students? Anything from the left field that gave you an aha moment?
Uh, yeah. One of the a couple of the students really did a good job of basically combining two themes into a single monster. And having been so deep in developing monsters that were coming in, the simplicity of it, but how it worked as a tool for a DM to run a fun game was great. And so it didn't take this deep backstory. It's just like, let's combine this monster and this monster, and boom, there was a really cool monster waiting.
Yeah.
And they were pretty common monsters that they were combining. And I'm like, I've never seen these two monsters combined in any edition over all these years. And the student just said, boom, this is how I made it. Because I had them do design notes. Uh, and another student did a similar thing. And I'm like, this is a great idea. I need to go back now when I start designing some monsters and just say, all right, if I do this and this, what does that make? What does that make? Does that make something cool? No. Okay. What about these two? And it's a great way to come up with ideas for monsters.
What were those two common monsters?
Yeah, it was a like a rock and a hellhound.
That is terrifying.
Yeah. So, it's a sort of a demonic fire breathing bird.
It makes me think of like a hellish phoenix.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. And so, it's used by people that, and she gave a good bit of lore for it, that made that connection work. And I'm like, yeah, that's a
That is actually how I actually do a lot of my monsters.
Yeah.
But I usually I'm super lazy about it because I'll just open up D&D Beyond and just have two different monster tabs open and be like, all right, I'm using this from this one and this from this one, and maybe I describe something completely different. It's just it's just a way to do things easier. That's probably like a Sly Flourish thing.
Well, he is pretty brilliant, so I wouldn't put it past him.
So anything like that just makes my life easier. And also just grabbing other monster stat blocks and just describing something different but using it because I remember in 3rd edition I would have just made that monster from scratch and spent hours and hours doing that.
Right.
And then I was like, I had an epiphany at one point. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't need to do that. I could just do it like this. And because the players don't know what's on the other side of this screen, they don't know you're just mashing things together and throwing them out there.
Yep, reskinning monsters as a DM, it's your best friend. Right.
Saves hours and hours of time.
For sure.
So we were just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out?
No, thanks for having me on. It's great to socialize. It's great to talk to you again. Thanks everybody for listening. And have fun gaming and hopefully gaming in person soon.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for coming on, Shawn. Appreciate it. As always, there are links in the description. Go check out that Kickstarter and follow Shawn on Twitter. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Bye-bye.